thick.
I was involved in studies
some-
back in the 80s.
Yeah.
Migration studies on outer. We had a high of 3,000 in a half hour of pass range. And at different elevations, you had different groups of species. You had jays, and you had robins,
Right.
and you had warblers coming down and landing on your boots. And there was a large number of birds. And they were hitting outer and then also Michigan Island, and they're heading south.
So that's what I'm saying, is
Well,
that how much do you really know? If I wanted to put in a wind project right here.
Right, exactly.
How long is it gonna take you to get the information? I mean, I can go hire somebody to do point counts, but how are you going to maybe go ahead and allocate these areas as high risk or low risk?
Well, and I guess that's an information need, is we know the south end of outer is a migratory bird stopover site, but we don't know where else. And if there's proposed wind development, say on Madeline Island or someplace along the shore, once they're at that south end outer, now where do they go? And what are their paths? And where are the locations that
So
would
how do
be
you get
most
that
injurious?
information?
And we have some loose knowledge of that. I mean, this is a small area, so anyone out birding, or who's kind of avid about it has an idea for how these things are. I could give you general patterns for how birds move and where things are. Some of it's based on assumption. There are some gaps for sure. Do we have a complete picture? No. Could I provide some general guidance to someone when they want to put up something? Sure. Could I provide them like the level? Yeah, no. Could I provide? Yeah, I could not provide.
Well, and the whole
that
Schwaminger
level.
Bay area is an important area.
So it sounds like you've got a lot of places that you would start with
Mm-hmm.
and find out, all right, that's where birders go, ergo, that's where birds are, which is often the case, but not always.
Right.
So just how rich is it compared to another habitat type like that 5 miles down the road?
Yeah, and I like that sort of framework or mindset
Yeah.
going into something like this, as opposed to, well, it would be nice if we knew where everything was.
No, you have to start somewhere. I think the approach would be, let's find out what this distribution of birds is. You're not going to measure that all for every foot, but just saying you got to start somewhere. But I think you have to have an overall approach rather than try to guess where wind projects are going to be, and then say we're going to focus there.
So Becky, based on that, what are the best techniques based on your experience for getting at that question?
To take like a hot spot and say, okay, let's quantify the hot spot, right? Because that's what you're talking about, is then, okay, if we have a perceived hot spot, let's quantify that, and then at the same time, measure what's going on somewhere else, so we can put it into context, because it's the only way to do it with any of these techniques. They're only relative.
Well, and with
So,
the size of the area, if you look at radar hitting, 50 miles?
which radar?
The weather radar?
No, I mean, they're talking about the
USGS or the marine radar?
The next rad?
That was next rad.
Yeah, next rad.
next.
But the
one.
beam of that goes up so high
There-
that at 70 miles, the beam isn't even isn't under 1,000 feet.
Yeah,
So it's not even gonna-
there's a sweet spot for that radar that's,
And
it's
it's-
about 50 miles, but it's not, doesn't cover 50 miles.
No,
It'll
it
go out
doesn't.
to 150 miles, but depends on your question, that beam's shooting up in the air.
The beam
So,
goes like this, so
Okay.
you can be under the beam very rapidly. A lot of your birds can be moving.
Well, I'm just
under the
wondering
beam.
if that could potentially be, if you wanted just a really broad look at, are there areas of heavy migration that we're not
It's only
catching?
good for exodus.
Okay.
Because birds eventually, within 3 or 4 hours, they're up high.
Gotcha.
And so most of our big what we know about birds through NextRad has to do with exodus, and that's the period after sunset when birds depart. After that, boom, the NextRad has absolutely no utility.
Okay.
For landing, it's good for looking at coastal areas where birds are going to be coming down, descending, and concentrating at a particular area. Then NextRad, like Sid Gotor did along the Gulf Coast. But
Gotcha.
beyond that, during the night, it's not going to tell you squat at all. And it also has issues where the sensitivity of NextRad changes from whether it's in dry air mode, so clear conditions, or whether there's a moisture in the air. And as soon as it detects moisture, it slams into precip mode, which is less sensitive in the way it surveys the atmosphere is very different. So NextRad's very good for coarse scale, and it's limited, but it's very good. If you had one nearby, that would probably point out a few hot spots of exodus, which is a stopover area or a
Right.
place where birds are concentrating.
I guess that's my question is whether,
Yeah.
as just a preliminary kind of course scale thing.
Do you
that
have
would be
next,
good.
what's in yours?
The
Next?
There-
next red
yeah.
doesn't cover, like it barely covers Duluth, and it's already 500 feet above, and it's a 5-degree. I talked to the guy at
Okay.
Doppler, and it's pointless to do bird stuff unless you want to know excess, but still, there's such a huge number of birds that are moving under the radar, literally.
Right.
And so it's not good for
Okay.
Lake Superior at all.
Gotcha.
So can you guys humor me? That's the first time that NSF said, we're gonna fund you. I want you to design a project that will assess this within a 125-mile area. How would you do it?
May I jump in?
Could we do it?
The first,
Yes.
the first thing
Anna
I
probably
would do.
knows how.
Yeah. The first thing I would do is, I mean, basically, we really don't know what's going on. We know some hot spots just because birders like to be there, but that doesn't mean there's not hot spots elsewhere where birders don't go. So I feel like there's like a tiered, like Rotsco versus maybe local scale. So one of the questions, well, we know that islands, or we think that islands are important, so there's a question.
Well, we have a lot of research actually on the
Okay.
islands.
But we could do islands versus mainland, or one part island versus another.
Well, and actually, we only have it on a couple locations with it, you know, I mean.
Okay, so,
there's- yeah.
so we can do island versus mainland. If we're thinking about birds coming to shore, which is kind of the general consensus, we could do coastline versus not coastline. And I'm talking point counts, you know? And I could argue transect versus point counts, but actually point counts are easier because you just stand in one spot than trying to board a walk through something in that sense. So island versus mainland, coastline versus non-coastline, and then we can go to finer scale and say, okay, riparian versus not riparian. Riparian perpendicular to shore, wetland versus not wetland. I'm just throwing these out there. And then we have the landscape covered. What is this landscape versus this landscape? This land cover type versus this land cover type. And then you have the seasonality component, but that can all be built in to these questions. I guess what I see as a first step is just it point counts because they're relatively easy. And I mean, consider.
Well, they are potentially on the mainland, but I'm pretty intrigued by the acoustic stuff, because on the islands, you know, think of it this way, we've done a number of surveys on outer islands.
Mhm.
It's really tough to get people out there. They're doing the surveys in the morning. We just saw from the presentations this morning that most of that migration's occurring from 10 o'clock to, you know, at night till 2 in the morning. You're missing all of that, plus you have observer bias. So if you had, you know, maybe some point counts, but if you had some of the acoustic information that's going 24/7, especially, and it's cheap.
All right, I will say Nancy Seafeld at Central Michigan University, I don't know that she got funding, but she was shopping around a proposal to test, to basically validate acoustic monitoring on some of the Beaver Islands,
Mhm.
and compare that with point counts and mist netting, and to have an integrated approach on those to compare how would you effectively track migration on these islands where people aren't.
Well, and just to try to figure out what you've got out there, because.
I'm going to interrupt though, because you said how to effectively track migration. But you're not tracking the same
Tracking it.
aspects of migration. If birds are on the ground, those are migratory birds that have decided to stop, and whether they're still in migratory movement mode or not. That's a very different phenomenon than birds aloft.
Okay, let me restate that.
Yeah,
Right,
I just wanna
comprehend
make
overall
that-
picture of bird migration across. the-
Yeah, exactly. So
Okay.
they're not comparable. I mean, I showed
Right.
the data where we showed that they weren't comparable because they're asking different questions. And so I think that's,
And Julie, in your case, outer is not going to be this major funneling point at 11 p.m. at night for birds flying overhead. The reason they get funneled there in great numbers is because it's out in the middle of the lake.
Right.
So when they descend in those late night and early morning hours, that's when they're finding outer, and that's when you're seeing big numbers of birds. So the idea of acoustically monitoring, that big 3-hour period early in the night.
No,
I don't think-
I'm looking at the ability to monitor over 24/7,
Sure.
because you're not able to do that, and during
Right.
times where it's just logistically very expensive and very difficult.
Right.
And then there's a lot of observer bias, because you've got people just trying to count birds coming overhead, which is really, really difficult. You're not getting to be.
But I think it'd be interesting to get some of those smaller radars spaced out on the islands. If we assume that a lot of these birds are coming across the lake and hitting the northern front of the islands there, and then where do they go? Do they hit the Bayfield Peninsula soon? Do they worm their way through Washburn? Do they go straight across the bay? Do they catch Long and head eastern? You know, like, just some visualizations like we were seeing this morning might give you an idea of, you know, like the common paths that might help us, you know, guess about areas we
Figure out
might
where
want
they're going after
to
that.
go after that.
And I like that, but, you know, I mean, in terms of priorities, how are we gonna use that information?
But
So
see,
next
we don't
Well,
want
it's like a
our,
first step.
Even in the
Yeah, our
next decade,
priority
but
is to
there's
figure out
bigger.
what's happening without a conservation.
we're lacking
implication.
that part. This is just for the sake, how are birds migrating through?
Okay, but
That's,
that-
that's,
But if
That's
we don't-
great, but
but
why
if-
invest our energy in that when there might be a more pressing conservation question that we can invest all those resources?
But if we
Okay,
don't know
so-
the baseline information, if we don't know how those birds are migrating through, we don't know if this development over here is going to have an impact.
Okay, well, let's say we put all these
Or if the land trust had
radars.
$500 million to invest in high priority stopover sites along the Wisconsin shore of Lake Michigan, Lake Superior, where would you tell them to invest their money?
His yard.
Yeah, I mean, if
Tell me a
identifying,
lifeline.
if identifying like important migration stopover areas is the objective
with
that is
you on
gonna
this.
translate to,
I am with you on this, I know where
I
you're coming
just,
from.
you know, I just fear
not what
we're
we're
gonna do
being
all
asked
this
to do.
planning on how we're gonna spread these counts across the Lake Superior shore to figure out where birds are, and, you know, that's
But see,
nice,
if
but
I'm a
there's
wind
probably more
developer-
important things we can do.
If I'm a wind developer, condo developer, 10 years from now coming in, and that information isn't available, but I'm gonna do it right now, you know, but it maybe if the information is available. So there's two different, like, there's a, I hate the word preemptive, but it's almost like we're trying to figure out this information preemptively in a conservation context. I mean, we could be looking at it in a migration context, just to figure out in the larger picture of things too. So there's a,
It's similar to rare plant surveys. You have to know where things are.
Well,
To
survey
make
is
sure
survey.
they're not getting
Survey is survey. You're going out and you're
Right.
finding out what's there, you know. So is
And
that what
that's-
you're doing?
that's
Is you're
part of
surveying
what's
this
being asked.
area, means you have to survey it. And, so I have a question for you. We talk about resource management. The example I gave about the blackpoles and the fact that we have such a huge percentage of our blackpoles are coming from Western populations that we know are declining. The breeding populations that we know are declining. How can I manage my resources any differently with that knowledge? Or what do I do with that knowledge? So I've got, let's say, habitats, they may be threatened, or wind power development, and a huge percentage of my birds, our banding numbers are declining, a huge percentage of my birds we've identified with the populations as as a person conserving migratory habitat, does it matter? Is that information, you need to know what breeding populations you have in the coming through your area. You know, a Tennessee wolver is not just a Tennessee wolver. So is that information do you need to know? Where are your birds coming from and going to? If you see declines, or do you have a population that's at threat that you need to protect? You have birds that are going up, let's say, to Western Canada. Are they the ones that are making shortcuts across, in the spring, making shortcuts across the possible islands, across the strait? You know, that's what I'm saying, is what do you know about your birds, and which of these, how do you manage for birds that might be at higher risk, or populations might be at higher risk? What do you need to know as well? Because that might drive what kind of monitoring you need to do. Acoustics is not going to tell you which population of blackpoll you're dealing with,
Right.
but banding might. Census, visual census, no. So, again, what's the other information? How is it going to affect what you're going to manage? How are you going to manage your resources, or what recommendations you make to resource managers? Might be also like the bigger bang for your buck. Do you need to be banding and handling birds on the ground to get some of this information to find out who are your birds, where are they going to?
Well, like Lacey, you know, you're here for the tribe and because you're interested in doing more bird monitoring. Like what information would benefit what you do on the reservation?
Well, currently, like, if there's any sort of development that's gonna occur on the reservation or around the reservation, those kind of papers cross by my office. So if it's something like, let's say if it's a rare bird or even mammal or whatever, that's something that I would have input in, but I need to know about it first. Like with any land manager.
So kind of like an inventory type information?
Yeah, even
Where are
that,
the
yeah.
important sites, where are the
Yeah.
rare adverse species, yeah.
Yeah.
That's
Okay,
basic,
so
that's basic
for your
information.
area, but this is what I'm getting at, though, we could never, almost never, not without a huge effort, design something for the whole Wisconsin shore of Lake Superior that would answer Lacey's question.
But we're not. What we're
completion.
doing is giving Lacey a protocol to be able to use at Red
Right.
River to monitor her site.
Yeah, but then if I'm collecting information too, like, let's look at something broader like climate change. If we're using similar protocols, but you can
Okay.
compare over
Right,
a large
exactly.
area.
Right.
Yeah, so what we need to do is come up with those tiers. This
Mm-hmm.
is a very layered approach, and so we need the layers that work across those different scales.
You got it.
And the Lake Superior shore of Wisconsin just is not.
But we
That's
can
okay,
provide-
let's go back to the first question and then just chip away at it for, where are we here? Okay, so if we're looking at when land birds migrate through, what's the best techniques for determining that?
We're talking about airspace at this point. If you want to move from habitat, from terrestrial. There's the first question was more like airspace, and I'm trying to figure out a different word for it. Basically how they move.
Well, this
and
is saying, when
second-
do land birds migrate? So what time of year? So if we want to determine what time of year they migrate through, right?
I mean, that's one of the things we already have more information on than anything. You just look at the eBird data and have a handle on that compared to some of these finer scale questions, like where exactly are they going?
Yeah.
Okay, then let's just.
Ebert provides an index of what? Of,
I mean, if you want to
Temporal
answer
patterns.
the temporal pattern
Temporal
question,
Thank you.
we've got some sort of info.
Yeah, I mean, there might be a few gaps for species that are not, handled real well or hard to detect or whatever that you might want to target, but for the most part, eBird's going to answer that question pretty well.
What I would add to that though is, would we be interested in temporal scales more like daily?
and is Ebert biased along this?
No,
You guys have
for some species, but.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and
for
plus in
general,
this
it's pretty good.
particular area where you have relatively few eBirders,
I think
i.e.
Chris is
me
here
and
to
Nick.
tell us it's time to switch, or?
No, I'm here to check in with you to
Okay.
see where you are in your process and do you need more time. And the group upstairs they're really into their first question and want to continue with it. And I want to be flexible here and be able to adjust time, even if we don't answer all the questions today, that we get some questions